before I get, I've got a few slides just as an overview of today's session, but I just sometimes like to even remind myself why I'm doing what I'm doing. But we've been
Hi.
getting a number of briefings this year, or recently rather, about how the extent of the hazards that we might be facing this year with combination of droughts and warmer weather, wildfires and wildfire smoke. And it's, in case we needed a reminder about the importance of this work, that's kind of what's been fueling me in terms of motivating me. But what really inspires me is things like this. I kind of feed off people and off the exchange of ideas, surrounded by a wonderful team and wonderful colleagues in the province, and now wonderful colleagues even south of the border. And so those are the things that really make me, motivated, inspired. I love that we're all moving closer and closer to making some real impact and demonstrating that impact, and that's a great feeling to be a part of that. So there's your unsolicited glimpse into what motivates me, and I hope some of that resonates with you. I'm sure it's not unfamiliar emotions for all of you. So I'll share briefly a few slides just to give you an overview of our collaborative and what we're hoping to achieve overall and today. So this is a collaborative network that was brought into existence by the wonderful folks at University of Washington with funding, as you can see at the bottom there, through the Urbanet UW Research to Action Collaboratory. And it's been wonderful to be a representative for Vancouver and especially for Vancouver Coastal Health, working with reps from Multnomah County and King County, and as well as the people from University of Washington. And the goal is really to create a place and a process where we can exchange ideas, share kind of those best practices, identify priorities for both researchers and practitioners as we all continue to work on this very important issue of extreme heat. And even beyond that, we all know it's not a big leap from heat to smoke, and it's certainly not a huge leap to start thinking about extreme weather events in general. So the explicit aim, and as you'll see in the next slide, what we've really been working towards over the last sort of 6-8 months in earnest is to kind of co-develop this community-driven and practice-informed research agenda and actionable recommendations. So how do we kind of get the right people in the room to identify those gaps and priorities that we and others can be focusing on to reduce the impacts that are felt during these extreme heat events? Very motivating. And where we're at in this process is we're on webinar 4 of 4, if you can believe it. Time flies when we're having fun. You can see the previous topics that we've covered. And this is going to culminate next month. Some of you are receiving an invitation very shortly for this transdisciplinary workshop that's going to see us spending about a half a day together virtually to really, again, dive into that stated goal from before of developing that research and action agenda. So really looking forward to that. We can't, we're somewhat limited by the number of folks that can participate in that. Otherwise, we'd invite everybody, but facilitating a group of 1,000 is probably more than any one of us wants to sign up for. So we're all really excited about that, and we'll be sharing everything that comes from that event far and wide. So if you're not there, stay tuned for the outcomes anyways. So today's webinar, extreme heat and community partnerships. We've covered the built environment, we've covered early warning systems, and we've covered just extreme heat generally. And so now the goal is to bring on 3 speakers who can share some of their thoughts and their experiences in mobilizing those community partnerships to prepare for and respond to extreme heat. We all know this, but it's an all hands on deck approach when you're tackling these kind of wicked problems. There's no force from above that's going to descend and protect everybody that needs it when it gets hot, when it gets smoky, when we encounter those types of challenges. And so it could be neighbors checking in on each other. It could be volunteers that are encouraging that type of behavior. It's cooling centers, it's distributing air conditioners. It's all the work that public health does, all the work that our municipal partners does, all the research that underpins that. it's everybody. And I think today's webinar is really meant to kind of drive that home with some examples from all three of the partner areas. So from Vancouver, from Multnomah, and from King County. And you'll see we've got some time, quite a bit of time usually, which is awesome. The Q&As have been wonderful so far. And we'll take you through submitting those questions as we go. There'll be a Q&A panel at the bottom of Zoom, so please use that, and we'll get to those as we go. And following that, we'll have some time to just kind of network and chat a little bit after the Q&A wraps up in smaller breakout groups. So that's always a nice time as well. So today, without further ado, we've got three speakers. From Multnomah County, we have Sherrie Villmark. From Vancouver, we have Magda Szpala. And from King County, we have Tony Machacha. And I'm very thrilled. I'm excited to see those of all three speakers speak. I don't get to see it enough. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you for your attention right now, and transition over to you, Sherrie, to kick us off with the first presentation.
Shared my screen before I unmuted myself. All right. So my name is Sherrie Villmark, and I am with the Community Energy Project. We are a nonprofit based out of Portland, Oregon, that serves Multnomah County and other parts of the state. We have a variety of programs. We do it-yourself education for the community on weatherization, lead poisoning prevention. We're the low-income facilitator for the Oregon Community Solar Program. We connect people to a variety of online sources. We have a variety of online sources. We also go into homes and do work directly. We do energy assessments, weatherization, energy upgrades, safety-related repairs. And then we also work in advocacy a lot with the Oregon Public Utility Commission, centered on green and healthy homes, decarbonization, and energy justice. So I don't need to go into a lot of detail with this group. I'm sure that our summers are changing. Oregon, especially on the west side, we were used to pretty mild summers, and we have had some pretty extreme events. We had a heat dome a few years ago where over 100 people with shelter passed away. And so we're also seeing a lot more wildfire and smoke events. We're a temperate rainforest, and even that is catching on fire, and seeing more in heat-related injuries and deaths. This is also affecting energy affordability because we're seeing wildfire insurance is causing rates to go up with our investor-owned utilities, and it changes how the electrical grid's demands. One of our biggest energy sources is hydroelectric, and that gets affected by snowpack. And so we're aware of all these things affecting frontline communities in really significant ways. So one of the things that we do, and one of the biggest things that we do when it comes to managing heat, is that we make home upgrades. And the way that we do this is an energy efficiency. So you have insulation, which slows down the rate at which heat enters a home or leaves a home. We have air sealing, and that's really about air exchange, cold drafts coming in, or if you're running AC inside your home, escaping. We focus on electrification, so we're also getting people off fossil fuels, such as gas and oil furnaces. We replace HVAC systems, water heaters, window replacement, do ventilation, and we also do repairs. We conduct repairs that allow for energy efficiency upgrades and also mobility. I'm going to get into why mobility would have anything to do with heat. So there's really three things that I think about when it comes to energy efficiency and these individual impacts, right? So we have climate resilience, health outcomes, and energy affordability. And each of these issues have a great deal of overlap, especially with lower income households. So efficient homes make for climate resilient households, right? People can handle more extreme temperatures, power outages, smoke events when your home is efficient and it is doing an adequate job protecting you. And when energy costs are lower, people can afford to run the appliances that they need to be safe. Anything from medical equipment to heating and cooling equipment, and health impacts are, health outcomes are also impacted by energy efficiency and even repairs, from indoor air quality to mobility within the home. So if you have people that can't afford to run their appliances in extreme temperatures, we did have some mortalities where people had air conditioning that literally was not plugged in because they couldn't afford to run it, right? Then you're going to be looking at serious health outcomes, not to mention the stress of that. Home with poor air sealing means poor indoor air quality, from standard pollution to smoke events from wildfires. As temperatures become more extreme, access and ability to run air conditioning and furnaces can actually be connected to asthma and COPD, right? Like after a while, an air conditioning unit almost starts to become a health device. And people might not think of mobility repairs as preparing for heat, but for those with disabilities, not being able to access a basement or take a cool bath or even leave their home in the next heat dome are going to be more vulnerable to health outcomes. One of the ways that we measure energy efficiency is with what we call home energy scores. So this looks at a home on a scale of 1 to 10. So an energy score of 1 is the lowest. It means that your home is expected to use more energy than 85% of US homes, meaning like not only is your energy burden a lot higher, but also your vulnerability to things like extreme temperatures and smoke events are going to be higher than 85% of homes. And all the way up to 10, where your home is going to use less energy than 90% of homes. So after CEP has been funded by the Portland Clean Energy Fund to make deep retrofits into homes for low-income households and BIPOC households in Portland. And our average energy score has raised from 3.1 to 9.5. And currently we're funded to serve 250 households in Portland, but we're hoping that that will increase. Heat pump technology is pretty amazing. The thing that makes heat pumps so efficient is that instead of creating energy from scratch, heat pumps move heat from one place to another. So if it's in the winter time, it's moving heat from the outdoors. Even when it's quite cold, there's still heat to be drawn and it heats up your indoors. And then in the summer, that's reversed. So heat pumps, they're often called, you'll often hear about ductless heat pumps, or they're called mini splits. These work in homes without ductwork, but you can also connect them to your existing ductwork like a regular furnace. And heating and cooling space is 46% of the average American household's energy use. So that is a really significant thing to go after. Another one is heat pump water heaters. It's the same thing. It's not creating heat, it's transferring heat. And a heat pump or hybrid water heater is 3 or 4 times more affordable to heat water than a standard one. And water heating is number 2 in energy use, which is 14%. So combine this with more efficient households, and what we're doing is we're bringing air conditioning into homes that didn't have them before. So we're replacing, say, a gas furnace with a heat pump. So now they have AC as well as cooling. They're also lowering their carbon footprint and having more affordable energy bills. Another thing that we do is work with people who are not homeowners. CEP provides weatherization workshops. We have summer workshops. Last year, we had 60 of them for nearly 1,000 households. And we teach people how to keep their homes cooler without air conditioning, or to reduce the amount of air conditioning that they need in order to stay safe and comfortable. We also talk about heat safety, smoke safety, heat management, water conservation, humidity control, and the people that participate in the workshops get a free kit of materials. So last year, our participants were very diverse. This is a great way to reach a wide variety of people, work with lots of people at the same time across different languages. You can see everyone from almost 60% of our folks identified as people of color. We had lots of folks with people with disabilities. 80% of the people we served make less than 30% of the median family income in the area. And when we do follow-up surveys, we want to say, like, how big of a difference was just looking at education tips and techniques without being able to make home upgrades. And 87% of our folks said that they were noticeably cooler in their homes, sometimes even more than 5 degrees difference. And most people changed their behaviors after a workshop, and they all utilized the supplies. So these are the two main ways that we really are engaging, like, directly with frontline communities so that they can manage heat events more effectively.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Sherrie. Much appreciated. I think we're now over to Magda for the second installment, and we're going to take questions, I believe, after all the presenters have shared. So again, there's the Q&A down at the bottom, and we'll keep an eye on that and bring those all together at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. Can you see my slide?
Yep, perfect.
Great, thank you. My name is Magda Szpala. I'm the Sustainability and Resilience Director at BC Housing. And I'd like to figure out how to move my slides. Here we go. Okay, I'd like to start with acknowledging that at BC Housing, we conduct our activities on the ancestral homelands of hundreds of different Indigenous peoples and nations across British Columbia, each with their own unique traditions, culture, worldview, languages, and history. And at this location, I'm at the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, who have been the caretakers of those lands for thousands of years. And I pay my respect to their peoples past, present, and future. I also like to start with acknowledging Curtis Brick. Curtis was an Indigenous man who in 2009 was experiencing homelessness and unfortunately died in one of Vancouver parks from heat exposure. And it was the first case that was publicly acknowledged in media and so on, of someone dying from extreme heat in Vancouver. So I kind of would like to dedicate my presentation to him. So I will take a few minutes to talk about who we are, considering this is a cross-border audience, what we do in terms of extreme heat and wildfire smoke response. We'll touch on impacts and then spend most of my time talking about partnerships. BC Housing is a Crown corporation in British Columbia, and we are responsible for the development, management, administration of affordable housing or community housing. We work with hundreds of different nonprofit housing providers, and we help over 100,000 households across BC through various programs, including rent subsidies for housing. That's one area of work. And the other is that we also license residential builders and administer own builder authorizations and conduct research and education for residential construction sector. So we are involved across the spectrum of the housing continuum. And today I will focus on the left side of what you see on this slide. So we'll talk about social housing, housing support services, and I'll touch a little bit about also housing, services for people experiencing homelessness. I thought I would also include a slide on who we serve directly. I'm not going to read it out, but if you look at this slide, you will probably notice that a lot of those groups are the same groups that are also considered to be at high risk from extreme heat. So some of the impacts that we've already seen in terms of our tenants and clients, huge impacts on mental and physical health. We've had several buildings operated by nonprofit housing providers that had to be evacuated due to wildfires. I know that the focus of the presentation today is on extreme heat, but it's really hard to talk about just extreme heat and not touch about wildfires and smoke. In my mind, they go together, and there is big impacts on all of those. We are very concerned that as the temperatures rise, more and more of our tenants will be unable to stay at home because of the indoor temperatures being dangerously hot, as well as situation where there is evacuations. We have to move tenants somewhere, and so that creates a lot of challenges. So certainly recognizing that there is huge need for additional resources to be able to effectively respond to those situations. And all of our tenants, have a need for accessing cooling and cleaner air. We're all aware of the heat dome that happened in 2021. This is a table taken from the coroner's report. And you'll see that on third line down, number of people that died. The total number of people that died across the province was over 600. And out of those, 62 were housed in affordable housing or supportive housing, and 13 were unhoused. And we zoomed in and did a little bit more analysis of those numbers. And so we found that 54 deaths were at 46 sites. So there was a few sites with multiple deaths. So obviously a big concern with those buildings. There were 8 deaths that occurred at affordable housing buildings that were not serviced by BC Housing, and 13 deaths that occurred among people who were homeless. So how do we respond to that? We have 2 focus areas. One is protecting our tenants and clients, and the other is building better buildings. So that means buildings with cooling and buildings with better ventilation, both new construction and when doing upgrades and retrofits. That's the part I'm not going to talk about today, but I will focus on protecting our tenants and clients. We do have our extreme heat emergency response, and includes things like creating cooling rooms for our tenants whenever there's buildings with some common space, organizing tenant heat wellness checks when heat alerts are issued, distribution of cooling kits. They include things like towels, water bottles, spray bottles, and other items, and really enhancing our communication, both internal and external, letting people know about how dangerous extreme heat can be. And all of that cannot be done without staff training. So I mentioned that we work with a lot of nonprofit housing providers. So not only we take care of our own tenants, but we also try and work with those nonprofits and increase their capacity to respond to extreme heat. And we're collaborating with a lot of different partners. Some of the key ones are mentioned here on this slide: Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, BCCDC, health authorities, municipalities, nonprofits, and community organizations. And I will touch on them a little bit more in my presentation. And just a couple of other things that we've done in the last 2 years. We did install window films in some of our older buildings where we know there was a big problem with overheating, and there was not much that can be done from other sort of more technical solutions. We found that window films allow for low tech and somewhat effective way of bringing the temperatures down a little bit. We've also been experimenting with some external shading. And we've done more engagement with our own tenants through the tenant survey and focus groups and community development that I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. We are supporting nonprofits in creation of outreach teams that seek out people who are homeless and distribute cooling kits, provide communication, and create sometimes shelters through pop-up tents. So here's a picture of an example of a pop-up tent in one of the municipalities near Vancouver. So how are our partnerships formed? What makes them successful? I have a few more slides, and a couple of them are sort of more generic, but also want to zoom in on a couple of examples of our partnerships. So what we found is that the easiest way to have an effective partnership for extreme heat is to build on existing partnerships. So for example, we've already been working with community developers, and now we are expanding that work to include work on extreme heat and wildfire smoke. We've identified that, sometimes we need to bring different experts, and the health authorities and the medical health officers have just been fabulous to work with, and we've been working with them for a long time. We could not do this work without them. And looking at what are other opportunities, and building really a lot of our partnerships that are now formalized started through sort of one-on-one interactions and developing personal and professional relationships. So here is a specific example of collaboration on awareness and education specific to extreme heat. And you will notice that the picture in the middle of a screenshot of a presentation that was conducted in 2019. And that was when we collaborated with BC Nonprofit Housing Association, BC NPHA, as well as the Homeless Services Association of BC, HSA BC, to organize, to bring people together to talk about extreme heat and what can be done and how we can synergize our work together. And in that workshop, we had medical health officer doing presentation on health impacts. We had nonprofits presenting on the work that they do related to extreme heat. We had Health Canada. So really, it was a great example of collaboration. Since 2009, we've pretty much been conducting similar sessions every year. With COVID, we moved to online environment, but now starting doing both online and in person. I just thought it'll be might be interesting for some of you to hear who else we work with. So nonprofit housing and shelter providers are our key partners because we work with them on housing, and now we're just adding sort of element of working on with those nonprofits on how to respond to extreme heat. Oftentimes our relationship is that of a funder, but more and more we're collaborating on education and capacity building within that sector. I've already mentioned close collaboration with health authorities, medical health officers, and BC CDC, as well as municipalities, sharing of our resources and best practices. We found the hard way that if we don't communicate and collaborate, oftentimes we're duplicating efforts in our extreme heat response. And so now with more proactive communication with the municipalities, we synergize rather than duplicate our efforts. We also connected, those are just a few examples of sort of recent and current research projects that we're working on. University of Waterloo has just completed research on a few of our community housing sites on indoor temperature study. And we're just about to embark on new research projects with National Research Council on early warning system that would connect the outdoor temperatures with the indoor temperatures and provide recommendations on retrofit strategies. And the other new research is with UBC and Health Canada, or indoor environmental quality and health. And we're working sometimes with consultants on things like conducting tenant survey. And then the key organizations for this presentation is our community-based organizations. We're working with several neighborhood houses or community centers. One of our key partners, Canadian Mental Health Association, and we're working with nonprofit consultants such as Shift Collaborative and Building Resilient Neighborhoods. And I actually want to zoom in on Building Resilient Neighborhoods because they've been just an amazing partner. It's an organization that was set up to support community development with resiliency as their goal. And we've partnered with them, as well as Shift Collaborative, which is another nonprofit, to experiment and innovate in terms of our community development efforts. And so we're working with our site staff, we're working with different neighborhood houses or community centers, and the goals of this work is threefold. So how can we enhance social connections amongst our tenants? How do we create a culture where neighbors can help neighbors? As we know from resiliency, that can be a very important and effective way of supporting individuals. And how do we prepare those communities to be better equipped to respond to an emergency? And I would like to say that this collaboration specifically has just been amazing to watch. And I've just recently been talking to people involved in this work, and they're saying how bringing people together creates new opportunities and allows them to expand the collaboration with other organizations. So this is an ongoing work, but sometimes we reach out to other community groups, whether that's firefighters or community groups supporting specific populations, such as people with hearing loss and so on, that they bring onto the site and support the work that we do as part of this project. So just to sum up, when I was reflecting on what makes partnerships successful, I realized that, when there is two organizations or more that have shared goals, that really helps. We can then, work together, open and regular communication, right partners for the right projects, and having resources. We've tried to do some of this work a few years ago when we didn't have as much support. Unfortunately, it took the experience of the heat dome and some of the deaths that we experienced for the organization to recognize that it's important to invest in building more resiliency. And now we have more resources, and that work is taken to a different level. And just including a slide here, we do have a lot of tools and resources on our website, so I encourage you to check it out. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Magda. For a second, I was worried that you had skipped over the world's cutest thank you slide, but then you went back to it. So that's good. Thank you for another great presentation. Again, we'll circle back to the questions and just pass it right along to Tony to take over with our third presentation before our extended Q&A. Thanks, Tony.
All right. Let's see. Hi, everybody. I am gonna share my screen as well. Can you see my presentation?
We can, Tony. It's in, yeah, if you click the full slideshow, I'll let you know if it goes into the full screen mode on us. Looks perfect.
All right. Thank you again, Craig, and yeah, other colleagues who invited me here. My name is Tony Machacha. I use he, him pronouns. I work for the County Regional Homelessness Authority, based in Seattle, Washington, serving the residents of King County, Washington. That's a county of 2.2 million people, with a population and house population of about 53,000 people. And I've been in this role since November of 2021. Before that, I was with Public Health of Seattle and King County. And so I have a lot of connections and still have relationships with Public Health Seattle King County. I run the team that is responsible for community capacity building, and one of our responsibilities has been to manage severe weather response, whether it's heat, cold, or smoke season. And for King County Regional Homelessness Authority was founded just about 4 years ago as a partnership between City of Seattle and King County. And we are bringing aboard other cities in the county. There's 38 other jurisdictions in the county that we are gradually bringing into supporting this KCRHA. And our mission is to significantly decrease homelessness throughout King County using equity and social justice principles. And a theory of change is that if we create a homeless response system that centers the voices of people with lived experience, then we will be able to meet the needs and eliminate inequities in order to end homelessness for all. So we always ground ourselves in our theory of change when we do our work out in community. And our team's role is to provide an emergency system of services, including operating safe, short-term emergency day and nighttime shelters, and also coordinating outreach to unsheltered people within the county. We depend on key partnerships Many of these were new to our, we actually inherited them when the interlocal agreement was formed, and we inherited contracts from the city of Seattle and from King County. We have really good working partnerships with the city of Seattle, Human Services Department, Mayor's Office, and then also with Public Health of Seattle, King County. We have developed some really good working relationships with the National Weather Service, the Seattle office, as well as King County Office of Emergency Operations, the Seattle Fire Department, Harborview Hospital in Seattle, University of Washington, Goddard, and we have a whole list, probably 50, 60 contracted and maybe another 30 uncontracted service providers and community-based organizations that we work with during severe weather events. So we've formalized our stages of response to severe weather. We have 5 stages. There's the monitoring that happens ongoing every day, and there's 2 of us, mostly it's me and my supervisor, who monitor a daily automated 7-day weather forecast that has precipitation, temperatures, high, average, and low temperatures, and accumulation, precipitation and air quality forecast. And every day at 6 we get that report, and we discuss it in our morning huddle around 8:15 every day, just if there's anything coming up. And if we notice that there's something indicating a severe weather event based on the tiers we've established, which I'll talk about next, we go into a pre-activation stage, and then we go into full activation. And then after the event ends, we have a deactivation protocol, and a post-event where we look back and gather lessons from partners, providers, and also internally from staff on what went well, what didn't go well, what should we do, what should we do more of, what should we stop doing, and what should we start doing going forward. So we're continually learning and improving our response. People will have options. We will announce where people can go depending on what's available. There's existing emergency shelters that have drop-in. Others have expanded capacity that will ask to add more beds if it's an overnight sheltering situation. We'll stand up severe weather shelters, whether it's for heat or cold. So we'll have warming and cooling centers depending on the time of day. And then we also depend a lot on our library partners, King County Library System, as well as the City of Seattle Library, Public Library. And we also offer funding to a family shelter intake line that is administered by our partners, Mary's Place, who will screen families for what they need and connect them to the YWCA in Seattle, who have hotel vouchers that we fund, and they will get relocated to hotels for the duration of the severe weather event. So when it gets hot out here, we know King County is mostly wet and moderate, but when it gets hot, it can get very dangerously hot, especially in the beginning of the summer season. So we've partnered with the National Weather Service and revamped our response system. In 2020 and 2021, we were using just straight up temperature, but the heat risk index is a much better way of determining what the effects of heat are going to be on the human body, because it's based on the afternoon heat and the effects of overnight temperature in terms of how, if it cools down at night or if it stays hot at night, it'll either mitigate or augment the effects of daytime heat. And so we use the yellow, orange, red, and magenta heat risks scale categories, which also is level 1, 2, 3, or 4 respectively. And when we see a tier 1 or heat risk yellow event predicted, if the forecast is going to last for only 24 hours, just one day where the afternoon temperatures will get into the yellow range, we will do targeted dissemination of key public health safety information and to at-risk populations. And so this is mostly the unhoused populations, whether they are at shelters during the night or out in encampments or out in the street during the day. We work with outreach teams to get the messages out. Now, the good thing about using the heat risk also is that it has very high resolution the prediction for the heat can zoom in on this 1.6 mile grid or 2.5 kilometer by 2.5 kilometer. So we are able to respond much better, much more nimbly and efficiently by focusing on the hot zones and the heat islands. We are not too stretched trying to cover the entire county with information or outreach or supply. So it's really good to be able to see where the heat is going to be and what populations are there. And in fact, sometimes if it's going to be a place in the county that doesn't really have a non-unhoused population, then we can scale back our response and conserve our resources for another time. When the forecast is for the next level, tier 2 is orange, for only 24 hours. Then we'd also similarly do the targeted resourcing, but we'll also provide water and other cooling supplies for distribution to at-risk communities. So we've had a partnership with Public Health of Seattle, King County. We get access to cooling supplies, water, Gatorade, and other electrolytes and hats and sunscreen and water bottles, stuff like that. When the forecast is for more than 24 hours at the heat risk orange level, then we do what we do for only the 24 hours. And then we also partner with cities and jurisdictions to activate daytime cooling centers. That also includes the libraries in those areas that are forecast to have the extreme heat. And then we also work with our contracted providers to understand what the equipment needs are, if the ventilation HVAC systems are working, if they have ice making systems, just kind of getting ready in case the heat further escalates to a tier 3, which would be red, or tier 4, magenta. And so if those are the forecast conditions for only 24 hours or less, then we do the targeted outreach, opening cooling centers, a lot more supplies of water and other rehydration supplies. But if the heat forecast is in the red and magenta for more than 24 hours, but it cools down at night, which happens here more often, then we'll scale it up to opening daytime cooling centers. And we also have been experimenting with the cooling tents and misting fans. I saw Magda showed a picture of that in Vancouver. So that's pretty cool. I'll talk to you about how you did it, so we can figure out sharing information to do it better this year. And then we also work with our outreach teams to conduct wellness checks on elders and people living with disabilities to make sure that they're safe. If it's going to be a magenta situation with no overnight cool down, then we open public buildings for cooling, and we staff them with shelter staff to have just the same way we respond to winter conditions. And then for air quality, we have poor air quality. We activate when the AQI is at 101 or higher. Between 101 and 150 is the unhealthy for sensitive groups. And we've been opening cleaner air sites, which includes the libraries, directing people to libraries, and then also doing a lot of outreach and distribution of N95 or K95 masks with information on what we need to do to keep ourselves safe during unhealthy air events. And if it's a red, where it's unhealthy for all groups, then we do the same thing. And then we also activate the public buildings where people can shelter during the day or day and night. So this is just a quick rundown of what we do during an activation response, during a pre-activation, activation, and then post-activation. Tier 2 or tier 3, pretty much the same thing. Tier 3 is a little bit more with the transportation coordination. We have to work with the fire departments and other emergency responders to make sure nobody's left outside. And our communications are run by a really good communications team who have been backing us up with a website, social media, emails, and other communications. So we have our meetings every morning, and they do what they need to do. So that was my time. I'm telling you, my time is up. And improving our response, we have a 5-year plan that includes a number of activities we want to do to improve our response to severe weather. The biggest one is shoring up funding and reimbursement processes and also shifting to seasonal shelters so we don't have to keep on activating with every episode of severe weather. And finally, last year, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Weather Service, recognized us as a weather-ready nation ambassador of excellence for the work we do in inspiring others to take action to become ready, responsive, and resilient, and especially by addressing vulnerable populations' needs and the community collaborations we've built by engaging community, our workforce, and our social networks. So that's it. It's a lot of work. We just finished responding to a cold snap last week, and now we're gearing up to start preparing for extreme heat probably in the next couple of weeks. Never know. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. That was awesome. Also appreciate the use of the timer. I always have it set up and I never remember to hit the start button. So good on you for actually remembering. It's wonderful. Resham Patel from University of Washington is going to facilitate the Q&A. There's been some great ones in the chat and in the Q&A and probably in your brains as well. So over to you, Resham, and thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks all for, again, being here. My name is Resham Patel. I'm on faculty at the School of Public Health at University of Washington. I'm delighted to be the co-lead for this project and excited to have you here and our panelists. Thank you for bringing your perspective on partnerships. I come formally from practice and get to serve in that role for the Center for Disaster Resilient Communities as well, which we'll talk about after this. But first, I have a lot to reflect on. There were some great questions coming in by way of the Q&A feature, the chat. We also had some questions come in before today's webinar when you registered. So I'm going to try my best to bring things from the different spaces to our talented speakers, some of which they've already touched on. And so I'll give them an opportunity to build off of that or pivot to other questions. So we had some specific ones. Maybe first, Tony, since you were just speaking, hopefully you've had a chance to take a sip of water. I'll go to you. There were some questions about the heat risk tool, which I think you spoke to, and maybe a specific one that came in advance about early warning systems. This could be to you or to the other jurisdictions for residents who don't have cell phones or cell service or access to internet. Just thinking about the tools and resources that your agencies are bringing forward. What does that mean for specific populations who may not be connected to the typical ways of early warning systems? I'll ask that very specific question. There was a lot on shelters, so I'm going to wrap some thoughts on shelters up as well while you work on that one.
Okay, shall I go first? Yeah, so we have always had, when we do our announcements in preparing for the activation, we also print hard copies of the information and we distribute those. We give those to our outreach teams, are able to print, or they can pick up hard copies to distribute when they are going out and about. And then we also have partnerships, really good media partnerships with the KUOW Public Radio in Seattle, and they make those announcements as we prepare to open shelters. But those are the two main things, and I think word of mouth as well. As we prepare early, we ask people to go and speak to their friends and keep the word going that there's going to be extreme heat or it's going to be ice, and we can find shelter at these places.
Great. We'll see if there's others who want to build on that. If not, Tony, I'm going to come back to you on some questions on sheltering in a minute, though I saw Sherrie had put some thoughts from Portland's perspective as well on transport. So we'll catch up on what's going on in the chat about determining shelter locations, how people find those locations, partnering with transports and paramedics, EMS agencies on kind of shelter operations. I would bundle. I wanted to take a step and zoom back a little bit about just the idea of developing and cultivating partnerships. Sherrie, you mentioned the home energy efficiency scores and going really from what I thought was incredible. I had to look at it a couple of times, going from the scores in the 3s to the 9s. I guess I was interested in how existing or new partnerships may have supported the success in moving the scores up, or something that you learned from or taught to your partners in other agencies or sectors, whether it be health or from other spaces. So I was curious in terms of from a partnership development and leveraging and learning standpoint, how that came to be. We had a question that came in, if this is helpful, in registration that came in as highlighting barriers and enablers to identifying partnerships as well. So I wonder if you can reflect on that.
Yeah, for really, CEP's been around for a little over 40 years, and we've seen the need in the homes that we've been in. We'd always been able to do really small jobs, really quick repairs. And it really wasn't until we got this funding, and the partnership was with the city of Portland and the Clean Energy Fund, that enables us to like do more than just patchwork, right? I always feel like serving people, it's almost like a person in trauma and medical trauma. You got the people that'll put pressure on the wound, you got people that bandage it up, and then you got the people that do like the real surgery and like the real like repairs. And we'd always been the ones putting like pressure on wounds. And then this funding source allowed us to be much, much more flexible, because sometimes the homes, we work with a lot of seniors, people with disabilities, people that have long-term maintenance issues, and sometimes it's $30,000 into one home to be able to retrofit to that level of energy efficiency. Even with this incredible funding source, we still have to turn away half of homes because the repair budget is so enormous that it outweighs. There's a lot of calculations that say you could put X amount into a home, this much needs to go to efficiency, this much needs to reduce carbon, et cetera, and it limits the repairs. So we're still, even with this huge improvement, we're still in a situation where we have to turn away our most vulnerable homes, where it's like you're too bad off to be able to have like kind of the golden ticket level of support that you need for now, which is something that in our advocacy space, we're, gathering all this data in order to help decision makers change the ways in which they measure success and measure accountability, to be more flexible and thoughtful in that. So we still have, and then if you are one house outside the city of Portland, we can't help you. So funding is always a puzzle, and it ends at these borders, not based on need, but based on money typically, and funding sources. Some of the other great partnerships that we've had are, a lot of them are in workshops. So we're giving 60 workshops in summer, and none of them are at our office. They're all with other partners. So we've worked with like senior housing, different immigrant groups. You have people who maybe even came from really hot climates, but the housing was built completely differently. Housing that's built to have cross breezes built in, right? And to utilize that environment. But our environment, this is new to us, and our housing doesn't match like really like a lot of hot weather climates. So people who were extremely savvy with the housing where they come from, like don't know how to utilize the housing here. And the way that our energy is very expensive, more expensive than other regions. So we've worked with people, about half of our workshops are translated into multiple languages. And there's a lot of sharing of tips too, where the people we're teaching are also teaching us. We build it into the workshop. It goes into like future classes. So we're working with dozens and dozens of partners that see a need in their community, and they're like, well, we're focused on women and infants and children, and usually it's food, but this is a health concern. So we're going to stretch our mission a little bit so you can come teach our participants there. And it's been tons of exciting partnerships that we wouldn't be able to serve the people we serve without them.
Thanks, Sherrie. I appreciate that. And you were hitting on some of the follow-up questions that I would ask about. We had a question come in about for any or all three of you about challenges and special considerations in working with seniors or older adults. I think you started to touch on that. I'll have a question for Magda in a minute about BC Housing's work with mental health issues and populations. And so I think the other piece, and there's questions coming in the chat as well about communicating about extreme heat and climate events, and sort of the question has already been, I think, pivoted to a prior collaborative webinar on communication. So there's a lot of, it's really exciting to see all these things kind of coming together. I'll just ask one more follow-up question, and that's on the workshop participants. In thinking about how you did that original outreach, maybe when you first got started to getting those workshops off the ground, how you were able to actually tap into who ultimately became your invitees and the folks that you've engaged. Sounds like it's a iterative process. You're learning from each one and developing, but how'd you first get started for those who might be thinking about something similar?
Well, we've been giving workshops since 1979, so I can't speak to that, like, but I would say, like, whenever we're starting a new program and we're looking for partnerships, a lot of it is to look initially to mission alignment. So like we're saying, okay, we know that multifamily housing is a missing gap. So the way to work with multifamily housing is to work with the resident service coordinators, who are the unsung heroes of the housing industry, and to say, you know, have you got people that are, you know, have really high energy bills, or they're seeing mold? How can we help also solve the problems that you're seeing that's struggling with you? And we can do tenant education. And then sometimes there's negotiation where they're uncomfortable with this supply being given out, but not that supply. And then in the end, we're asking them to do the outreach to their community. If we're going to go to housing, can you put a flyer under all the doors from you with your logo on it, talking about us? Do you have a community space? Do you have translators? Some partners have, or rather interpreters, I should say. Some people have interpreters, sometimes we provide them. So typically we're like, what have you got and how can we fill in the gaps to make that happen? We work evenings, we work weekends. One of the things about serving seniors especially, but most immigrant groups as well, is the digital divide is a serious thing. We can't have these over Zoom. Under COVID, we had huge drops in engagement with a lot of our key communities because they don't have access to the internet or streaming internet, or weirdly, sometimes it's easier to leave a space and then learn than to try to learn while you've got kids and dinner and all the things going on in your lives where you're very distracted. We can say, bring your children with you. And it's just a different place where parents can like pay deeper attention. And seniors really have overwhelmingly told us they want it in person. So we come again and again. And then word of mouth starts to spread and we learn lessons from there. So look for mission alignment and say, like, how can our ideas solve your problems so that we're not asking you to do another job for free. We're not asking you to do our job for us. We're helping you do your job. And that's been a really effective approach for us.
Yeah, that's great advice about how to approach something, especially from getting started. Makes me think, and Sherrie, you've got, I'll just point out, got a couple of great questions in the Q&A if you have an opportunity about weatherization, seismic retrofitting, and your advocacy work. So I know some of that you touched on, but those seem very specific, and we'll come back to you. But if you're able to type in some answers, by all means. Your comment there reminds me when Magda was going through their presentation of looking at the various collaborations. There was a couple of slides that very much resonated for me in terms of the different alignments or types of activities that you take on in working with nonprofits and community-based organizations, alongside then thinking about different approaches for governmental agencies or municipalities. I think it sounds like you take different approaches depending on the type of partner you're looking at, and there'll be different intricacies involved. There's a question that came in through the Q&A that I think also goes along this thread of they're curious about additional grant funding for smaller, remote, and isolated local governments to support capacity. They're finding that smaller remote centers don't have the capacity for robust data collection to support the actions to save lives. And I think I'm just wondering if you might be able to speak to the kind of various strategies or approaches depending on who that partner is. If they're a smaller entity, if they're a community-based organization, if they're a partner governmental agency. You brought up researchers. Don't have to take it all, but I'm just building off of the question that came in through our Q&A. So let me turn to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can answer it very well. Because we are a Crown agency, we do get funding from different levels of government, and then we are actually, distributing the funding specifically to housing, and then sometimes we're able to sort of do a little add-ons. So I would I would probably be seeking kind of like, who in the community might be a better source for finding additional resources and grants that might be applicable. Yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to answer this question. Sorry.
Magda,
No.
I just had a quick follow-up, Rachel, if I could.
Yeah.
Magda, what about that program that you mentioned, the Building Resilience Neighborhoods? Do you know what facilitated that? And specifically, because it now seems like it's been around for so long, like what sustained that? Sometimes these things just last a year and then disappear. Like what made that possible in the first place, and then what makes it stick
Yeah,
around?
I think that program is funded through a number of different organizations, and I'm not part of the organization, but from my external viewpoint, I think what sustained them is just amazing work that they are doing and the work that's needed. And it was a collaboration among a number of different partners. Initially, it was a few nonprofit organizations such as BC Healthy Communities, Community Social Planning Council of Greater Victoria, Fraser Basin Council, Canadian Centre for Community Renewal, that got together and recognized there is a need and there is an opportunity to address that need, and then secured funding from a number of different sources. And now we've engaged with them because we have our own community developers and tenant support workers, and yet the work on the building communities with a focus on resilience is new. And so we refer to that organization, Building Resilient Neighborhoods, as sort of experts in that field. And when I talk to our community developers, they really recognize that expertise and the need for someone to help facilitate the process and bring in, hold the space and bring in new ideas and help to create those partnerships and new connections.
Thank you both for the kind of ability to bring that in from real examples that you all have been championing. And understanding there are barriers and limitations to the way in which some of the programs are structured in terms of what you can amplify. I think I would just I invite any of the other panelists as well to reflect on working with agencies and partners of different sizes, or thinking about resources that you bring or partners bring to the table. I think one of the things I was reflecting on, Tony, when you were talking about how your partnerships have started with, one jurisdictional lens, and now how you're growing, kind of the benefits of scaling and expanding partnerships to various jurisdictions within your footprint, and if there are any trade-offs in that, or ways in which you'll approach services and partnerships differently for a place like the city of Seattle versus maybe a smaller jurisdiction that you might collaborate with. So not to put you on the spot, I'm just wondering if those conversations are underway, and if there are kind of specific and tailored strategies when you think about what that expansion would look like.
Yes, those conversations are ongoing. They're mostly led by my colleagues on a team that is called the Sub-Regional Planning Team. There's been 4 of them, and now I think there's 3 of them. I think our director of Sub-Regional Planning actually came to the University of Washington. Yeah, so we're looking for another director. But so, yeah, and so each of the sub-regional planners is responsible for a sub-region of the county. So we have a north, an east county, is a Seattle, is a South King and Southeast King County. And each of those regions has different needs. And so the planners have been holding different kinds of meetings there's different levels of appetite for funding and supporting different kinds of activities. But we found that severe weather has been one of the most agreed upon issue to support. Even cities that have passed ordinances banning camping or being very strict on homeless camping outside, still will agree that we need to provide shelter during emergency situations. So it's at different paces. South King County moves at a different pace. They've been doing their own thing for a long time. But then you go to the north side, we just got them onto an interlocal agreement, and they're supporting a shelter in Shoreline. So we just we travel around, take the example from here and bring it somewhere else, and then kind of see if they'll also jump in. And now I think I've also heard that Redmond, the city of Redmond, is excited to also start working on something similar to join the funding pool. So it's working gradually. It's just different speeds, and that's what we always do. We move at the speed of community.
I love that, always move at the speed of community. And I think all three of you brought up in different ways about thinking about shared goals. Magda, I think that's the term you used. Thinking about aligning mission is what Sherrie brought up, and Tony now thinking about how you're taking that model into different communities and ideas. So staying true to the spirit, even if it's adapting and changing for different audiences and partnerships. So I know there's so much more we could talk about, and there's still a few more questions in the Q&A. Please, panelists, feel free to tackle those through the power of typing. I'll ask one more question before I try to wrap us up and continue the conversation in breakout sessions, so that you can talk directly to the regional partner or panelists that you'd like to have an ongoing conversation with. And I think one question that came in a bit earlier was just thinking about one of the most useful resources, tools, or relationships that your organization, partnership that your organization looks at for doing this work. It's kind of a broad question, and I was wondering if I could adapt it to the spirit of our conversation here, and thinking of what has been one of the most key ways, your partnership strategy, your best tip for getting to collaborate with the people that have amplified your mission, your vision, your kind of shared goals, right? How did you get together at the table and have that shared vision? That seems to be the common theme. So there were a couple of nuggets that you all have dropped, and I was just going to give you all an opportunity to just reflect on that question before we pivot to breakouts.
I would give one little piece of advice is don't reach out to the executive director. I don't know, like oftentimes people want to go to the very top, but the way to form a lot of relationships I found are the on the ground people, the coordinators. They understand the operations, and their commitments are like a little more grounded in like what they're actually doing and what their capacity is. So that's one tip I would give.
Yeah, and I would add to that, just in the same line, building the community, building relationships before there's an emergency, before you have to respond. It might sound like, oh, wasting time going to this meeting, wasting time going here, but actually hobnobbing and knowing people before there's an emergency has really been good. Because when we start activating and I'm trying to call, say, the YWCA to ask them about utilization or money or whatever, like it's always nice that I already know the person, and they're much better, much more receptive to, the requests I'm making under duress.
Yeah, my tip will be to don't be afraid to hold the space and the question that you're struggling with, and invite others to kind of address it. Like when I go back to our initial work, we created opportunity for different partners to come in to explore the question, even though we didn't have the answers, but the answers kind of were provided collectively and kind of appeared over time. I also want to address, I'm sorry to take the time, but there was a question earlier on about how BC Housing is communicating with tenants with mental health and schizophrenia, and it will be a bit too long to type in, so I'll just take a moment to answer that question. So we do recognize that people with mental health and other chronic illnesses are specifically at very high risk of extreme heat related illnesses. And part of our extreme heat response plan is before the summer, so at around now, sort of March, April, we pre-identify who our most vulnerable tenants are in any given buildings. And it's work that's done by people who know the tenants and interact with tenants. That includes building manager, but also additional support people that have a relationship with the tenants. So that then when we have extreme heat warning, we do individual check-ins with those people, and those check-ins are both on the phone as well as in person. So that's one way how we try and support people with mental health challenges. And one of our close collaborators, Canadian Mental Health Association, they offers ongoing programming on some of our sites, not all, but that's another way how we try to address the challenges, specific challenges for that population.
Excellent. Thank you for the two-part answer there, and addressing the question in the chat, as well as our kind of concluding thoughts of this portion of our webinar in terms of how partnership tips that you have. I'll reflect on one last element that came in that'll allow me to pivot to where we're headed in this collaborative initiative. There was a question that came in via registration about how regions and these cities, I imagine each of your jurisdictions, learn from each other on dealing with extreme heat. And that is, as we've been trying to do, hopefully one of the core missions and opportunities you heard Craig when he introduced today's webinar, and thinking about, well, what's the focus of this collaborative and how can it help with sharing those ideas? One of the reasons we had this 4-part webinar series, and as I'll kind of move into our closing here, I'll share more about. But first, I hope folks will be able to stay on for a little bit longer as we go into breakouts. But I wanted to thank all 3 of our speakers for their excellent presentations, and for tackling such big questions that have been coming in through the chat and through the Q&A and my own editorialization. So thank you for bringing your expertise to light, and I hope that folks who are able to stay on will be able to join in our breakout sessions, which will open up here in just a minute. First, I'd like to just, and Mary Hannah, I don't know if we have kind of wrap-up slides, but if not, I'll reflect back, yes, to our goals and our next steps in thinking about where we're headed in working in partnerships. There's a reason we were very excited to have this as our focus of our webinar. Our 4th webinar is thinking about now how we go into working through a collaborative network of partners. So thinking about who you reach out to and how you learn and you share. And from here, we'll be co-developing this community-driven, practice-informed research and action agendas that you heard Craig mention more about. For those who may be interested, even though this is our last webinar, our 4th in this series of really supporting peer learning and learning from each other's jurisdictions on strategies and approaches related to extreme heat, as well as other climate and health programs. As those of you who've joined these before, you will get a link afterwards with a recording for today's webinar and your feedback as well shortly after. I also am very excited. I'll put in the chat, hot off the press, I think while we were in this, a new YouTube channel that our Center for Disaster Resilient Communities just launched. We'll have the recordings from the past webinars, including today's. So if you want to refer back to them at any point on ideas and partnerships that you'd like to pursue, we make that peer learning available to you. And we could also hope that you stay connected as we think about that workshop that Craig mentioned, and this co-development of research and action agendas. That's just the beginning. We see this as the opportunity to build partnerships and collaborations on these topics and continued learnings from those moving forward. So we hope that folks will stay connected through the Center for Disaster Resilient Communities. We'll be launching a page there to help expand our community of practice and the relationships that we've been fostering over this webinar series. With that, we'll throw some links here in the chat to get through to get you connected and remain connected on those items. And then I will be delighted to help open up our breakout rooms for those who are able to engage in continued dialogue.